Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rewire Your OCD Brain. Powerful neuroscience-based skills to break free from obsessive thoughts and fears. By Catherine M. Pittman, Ph.D., and William H. Youngs, Ph.D. Narrated by Kitty Hendrix. Publisher's Note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type Rewire Your OCD Brain into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code OCD, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. This publication is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering psychological, financial, legal, or other professional services. If expert assistance or counseling is needed, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Part 1. Obsessive Brain Basics. Chapter 1. Obsession in the Brain. The Wonderful and Terrible Human Brain. We tend to think very highly of our brains and focus on all that we have achieved with them, from building pyramids to landing on the moon. But our brains can also trap us by creating perceptions, thoughts, and beliefs that torment us. Your brain can produce doubts that worry you continuously. It can dominate your focus with thoughts you can't stop thinking about. It can lead you to feel you must do something over and over in order to feel relief. It can prevent you from making the simplest decision by endlessly producing different scenarios, making it seem impossible to know what's right. How can you break out of these processes that the brain produces? This may seem to be a very difficult question to answer. After all, you live within the reality produced by your brain. Every sight you see is provided by the intricate connections between your eyes and the parts of your brain that process and interpret the information your eyes receive. If those connections are destroyed, you will not be able to see, even if your eyes are perfectly healthy. Similarly, to hear a sound, you are dependent on your brain to interpret the meaning of sounds that vibrate your eardrum, from the ticking of a clock to the shout of the word liberty. If damage occurs in areas of the temporal lobe, the part that interprets the meaning of words, your friend's words will suddenly sound to you like gibberish or some strange foreign language. Your ears and portions of your brain are processing the sounds so you can hear them. But all the memories of what the sounds mean have been lost because that portion of the brain is damaged. Your brain gives the sounds you hear their meaning. Most of us do not consider how dependent we are on our brain for our perception of reality, unless we lose it. Our perceptions are shaped by the way the brain works, with numerous parts of the brain contributing to each perception. When Fran was hit by a car and struck her head on the pavement, she damaged a specific area in the back of her brain called the fusiform gyrus. She suddenly found she could not recognize faces. She saw someone's face, but she couldn't tell whether this was the face of someone she knew or a stranger. As soon as the person spoke, she could generally figure out whether it was someone she knew, but for the rest of her life she had difficulties using faces to identify people. She had to rely on other cues, like their voices, the topics they discussed, or a specific characteristic like red curly hair or dark eyebrows to help her. Most of us take for granted that our brains are processing the complicated structures of faces and storing detailed memories about them so that we can recognize a familiar face. We don't realize how our reality is shaped by the brain. Once we recognize that we're living our lives with a brain that processes and interprets our world for us, how do we escape from a brain that is constantly making our world seem dangerous? If thoughts of contamination dominate our thoughts, how do we stop them? If we have worries that we may harm someone, or that we have cancer growing in our bodies, how do we escape them? If we feel panic every time we try to drive a car, how do we overcome it? The brain is no longer helping us understand our world and adjust to it. It has turned into a torture chamber. If the brain has become your torture chamber, how can you escape it? If you have obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, you are especially in need of an answer to this question. You need answers about how the brain functions, so you can understand how to escape the trap of OCD. The truth is that your brain operates on the basis of specific rules and limitations. Once we understand how the brain works, we can use the rules and processes that govern the brain's functioning in ways that allow us more control over our lives. For example, knowing that the brain can only focus attention on one thing at a time is an important weapon of self-defense for a person with obsessive thinking. We'll show you how to use this limitation in your brain to your advantage, giving you a tool to gain more control over the thoughts and worries that distress you. Once you learn the operations of the OCD brain, as we'll refer to it, you'll understand more ways to have control over it. Just as you need to understand enough about how your automobile operates to keep it in good condition, you also need to know enough about your brain to get it to operate in a way that keeps you more comfortable. Having obsessions or constant worries in your brain is like having a car with a specific glitch or malfunction. Knowing about the glitch in your car's engine can be helpful in knowing how to manage the problem. You may need to constantly monitor the oil and regularly add some. Both authors of this book have PhDs, but we do not know what to do when a car starts making strange noises or has smoke coming out of the tailpipe. We call Jeremy, our favorite mechanic, and he tells us what needs to be done. In this book, we will explain how you can rewire your OCD brain to improve your life. In the same way we turn to our mechanic, you have come to the right place. We will describe what we know about the processes underlying the obsessive thoughts and compulsions that plague you, and give you ways to reduce those thoughts and behaviors and replace them with ones that will allow you to live your life more productively and happily. We will explain the processes that create the torturous feelings of anxiety and dread, feelings that often drive you to perform certain behaviors, sometimes over and over, in order to get some relief. We will teach you how to get out of the vicious cycles you feel trapped in by explaining new ways to cope. This will involve learning ways to deal with obsessive thoughts more effectively, as well as finding ways to cope with anxiety by keeping your brain from producing so much anxiety, living with some anxiety until it subsides, and turning anxiety off as quickly as possible. What causes OCD? If you have OCD, it's normal to wonder what is wrong with your brain. Is there a glitch or malfunction? We want to begin by saying that all of us have glitches and malfunctions in our brains. No one has a perfect brain. Each human being is different and unique, developed from an intricate process of cell union and division that is truly miraculous, combining genetics from two different people. Unlike cars that are tested, designed, and redesigned to minimize problems, this process is not designed to create perfectly operating brains. Every person has certain strengths and weaknesses in his or her brain. The best we can do is to take advantage of the strengths in the brains we have, train our brains to learn as well as we can, and avoid having to deal with aspects of life that require the use of functions in our brain that are less adequate. Some brains are great with mathematics, for example, and will make a person a great accountant. And some brains better stay away from that profession. Some people with OCD have brains that will focus intensely on minute details of a situation for hours, unsatisfied until everything is correct. That kind of brain can make a person a careful and correct writer, but it can also create difficulties in other situations, like never being on time because you don't feel ready to leave the house until everything is correct. We are capable of modifying our brains and behaviors through learning and skill development, but we all have our strengths and weaknesses, many of which are related to the specific brain we inherited. Parts of the brain that are related to OCD symptoms include areas of the frontal lobes in the cortex, the basal ganglia, and connections between the frontal lobes and the amygdala. We'll be discussing these brain regions in future chapters. But the question here is, why are these brain structures reacting differently in those with OCD? We have discovered that OCD and other anxiety-related disorders seem to run in families, suggesting that they are inherited in some way. If you have an anxious parent, you are more likely to have anxiety difficulties. Adoption studies have clarified that it is not just about being raised by an anxious parent. A genetic component definitely contributes to these disorders. But genetics is not the only important factor. We also learn our specific fears and worries from our individual experiences, families, and friends. In other words, the OCD-related processes in your brain are a result of both genetic tendencies and life experiences. In addition, researchers have discovered that obsessive thinking and other anxiety symptoms can be acquired through viruses that impact the brain. Two viruses which typically impact children between ages 3 and 12 are called PANDAS, Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder Associated with Streptococcus, and PANS, Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. These viruses cause damage in the basal ganglia, leading to symptoms like obsessive thinking, compulsive behavior, and tics. When a child develops OCD from PANDAS and PANS, the symptoms are likely to come on quickly after the child has the virus, without prior indication that OCD is a problem. Clearly, structures in the brain are creating OCD symptoms. Whether those structures have been affected by genetics, illness, or learning experiences. What's most important for you to know is that it is not your fault that OCD developed, and you should not blame yourself for that. On the other hand, it is your responsibility to learn about what you're dealing with and how to do something about it, because you deserve a better life than one that is limited by OCD. Symptoms of OCD can be very disruptive in your life, and understanding how they are created by your brain can be helpful in reducing their impact. Obsessive thinking in OCD. When you have thoughts that seem to repeat in endless cycles, you are dealing with obsessive thinking. Obsessive thinking comes in various forms. The most common kind is worry, which refers to thoughts about what could go wrong and potential negative outcomes that could occur. Worries often begin with, "What if?" and end with frightening ideas of what might happen. Worries generally change day to day, depending on the circumstances. People often actively and deliberately engage in worry, although some find worry difficult to control. People with OCD can find that worry tends to become time-consuming and uncontrollable. Obsessions are another kind of obsessive thinking. Obsessions also involve repetitive thinking, but they are more stable than worries, which often change day to day. For example, Bruce continually focuses on the specific idea that he might not be able to complete his college degree, even when he is getting good grades. Obsessions are unwanted thoughts that can't be dismissed. Obsessions might be worries, but they can also be images or impulses. For example, the image of her little brother being hit by a car pops into Rose's head repeatedly, and she can't get it to stop. Terrence often has the impulse to drive in front of a semi-truck when he is driving on the freeway, and he worries about what it means, even though he never acts on it. Obsessions can also be doubts you have about whether you did something, or a continual focus on deciding what you should do. You may continually worry about whether you left your electric hair straightener on, or take more than an hour to decide what kind of tea you should drink. Obsessions can be images of what terrible dangers could befall you, or the ones you love. Sometimes they are expectations for how you should do things that become rigid commands you feel you must obey. Some obsessive thoughts involve situations that are very unlikely or implausible, but still cannot be dismissed, like the idea that you ran over a dog on the way to work, but didn't notice doing so. Worries can be about all kinds of situations and topics. The human brain can probably craft a worry to fit almost any situation. Just think about what could go wrong in that situation, and you have a worry. Obsessions are more likely to fit into certain categories or themes. One theme is contamination, involving worries about being exposed to dirt, germs, viruses, and so on. For example, Gladys is terrified of eating anything at the church potluck because she doesn't know where and how the food was prepared. Another common theme is orderliness. Objects, events, and even movements need to be correctly arranged or follow a specific order. The contents of drawers, the cars in the driveway, the holiday dinner, even hand movements when talking can become a focus of concern. Violence and aggression can be a theme of some individuals' obsessions. A new recruit on a college football team may have a continuous worry that he has harmed someone during his high school career, even though he does not recall doing so. Sometimes people experience impulses or images of performing some aggressive or sexual act and worry that they may do so, even though the very thought distresses them. Perfectionism is a very common theme of obsessive thinking in those with OCD. Individuals with perfectionism are focused on avoiding flaws in their appearance or mistakes in their behavior, despite the fact that as human beings they cannot achieve perfection. One young girl could not tolerate her piano lessons because, after the instructor demonstrated an assigned musical piece, the girl could never hope to play it during her lesson the way the instructor did. A graduate student in English was paralyzed in writing her dissertation because no sentence that she wrote in her first draft seemed to measure up to her idea of dissertation-level writing. Other people focus on the sensitive themes of religion or sexuality. A man may worry that, since God is aware of all his thoughts, he has no chance of getting into heaven, and he may constantly seek ways of atoning for the angry thoughts he had about his parents as a child. Or a woman may worry that she is a lesbian, even though she has no attraction to women. We don't know why certain people focus on certain themes, but the same brain process underlies the different obsessions. It's only the theme that differs. Obsessive thinking can dominate a person's life. A college student may worry that his girlfriend does not love him and call her for reassurance multiple times a day. A mother driving to work might imagine her home in flames, fearing she left the stove on, and turn back to check, making her late for work every day. A nanny may worry that she'll grab a knife from the wooden block on the counter to stab the children as they sleep, leading her to quit her job. The same distressing thoughts keep returning again and again. They tend to take up more than an hour each day, sometimes dominating the individual's waking hours. Obsessive thoughts often drive the person to take action to cope with the thoughts or neutralize them in some way, and this often leads to compulsions. Compulsions are repetitive behaviors or mental acts that a person engages in to respond to a dreaded thought or situation, or to reduce distress. They can take a variety of forms, including checking, counting, cleaning, and seeking reassurance. Compulsions can come to dominate your life as much as obsessions because they give you a quick fix that helps you avoid obsessions or worries and the stress they create. When Damien gets nervous when in a traffic jam on the highway, he starts mentally adding the numbers on the license plates of cars in front of him. He knows it doesn't make sense and may even be dangerously distracting, but he feels it protects him in some way. Perhaps you feel a twinge of anxiety about the disarray of the pill bottles in the medicine cabinet, but when you organize them, you feel the anxiety go away. When you carry out a compulsion, the feeling of anxiety associated with certain thoughts or situations decreases, and the relief that you feel rewards you for engaging in that behavior. That relief makes the compulsion stronger. So, what is the problem? The problem is that your relief is only temporary. You will soon need to repeat the compulsion again and again. We will discuss how to reduce time-consuming compulsions in Chapter 9. Obsessions and worries in the brain. The human brain was developed millions of years ago, in a completely different world from the one we live in now. The pathways and processes in our brain developed to allow humans to survive in a world where they were not only hunters and gatherers, but also prey. As humans learned to farm and build communities, the pathways and processes in our brain adapted to be used in new ways. But that process of adaptation was not what you might expect. Sometimes people discuss the brain's adapting to new demands and opportunities, as if it were being remodeled like a home, with new rooms and staircases being built and new appliances installed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The pathways and processes in the brain have remained mostly the same across centuries, like an old log cabin that had a wall removed but kept the same furniture and appliances from a century ago. Over the centuries, some parts of our brain became larger and more complexly organized. But if you compare our brains, not just to the brains of early humans, but even to the brains of other animals, you find many of the same pathways and processes. Although we definitely have pathways and processes that don't exist in other animals, primarily in our frontal lobes. All the new pathways are connected to pathways that have been operating basically unchanged since we lived as hunter-gatherers. A useful analogy might be that the old cabin may now have a lean-to built onto it to use as a library, with many modern books on the shelves. But the cabin itself still has the old fireplace and all the rough-hewn wooden furniture it once had. Despite the knowledge contained in the books shelved in the library, no modern kitchen or heating system has been built. In a similar way, many parts of our brain have not been remodeled to adapt to our current lives. Primarily in our cortex, we have some additional circuitry that provides new capacities, higher-level thinking, and increased ability to store knowledge. But the basic structure and functions in the brain have remained unaltered. This means that even though we have abilities to think in ways that other animals do not, these parts of our brain are connected to older parts of our brain that operate as if we still were potentially prey for dangerous animals. We have an elaborate defensive system woven into the neural pathways of our brain and body that still impacts our daily responses to threat in a variety of ways. This defensive system is involved in creating the symptoms and distress associated with OCD. And instead of helping us, the more recently evolved thinking abilities in our brain can actually produce thoughts and images that make the brain more likely to activate the defensive system. Worry and obsessive thinking are some of the thinking abilities that have their roots in this newly developed part of our brain. The lobes of the brain behind our forehead, appropriately called the frontal lobes, became larger as humans evolved as a species and gave us new capacities that other animals do not have. One of these capacities is anticipation, which is the ability to think about what may happen before it happens. This ability developed in an area of the brain that controls our movements, which makes sense. If the frontal lobes are about making movements in our arms and legs, then developing the ability to anticipate what might happen would help us make appropriate movements. Developing the ability to anticipate before moving would be important in hunting and reacting to physical threats. But anticipation in the human brain went beyond just movement-related anticipation and developed into an elaborate process, ultimately including the human ability to imagine events and objects that one has never seen. This ability, combined with the ability to plan, also rooted in the frontal lobes, led to all kinds of uniquely human behavior, from learning to grow our own food to building remarkable structures, ultimately resulting in scores of amazing activities imagined and ultimately planned by humans, including traveling to the moon. This amazing ability of the human brain to anticipate is a gift to us in many ways, but it also has a cost. We're able to imagine a range of troubling events, from thinking about breaking an important object to imagining the manner of our own deaths, thoughts that represent events that may or may not occur. And these thoughts take a toll on the human race. We can worry and obsess about countless ideas and images, and, as we do, we experience emotional reactions that are similar to what we'd feel if the event actually occurred. This is because the new parts of the human brain that create these thoughts and images are wired into the rest of the brain. Unfortunately, the rest of the brain has not been remodeled in a way that would allow it to react differently to imagined dangers than it would to real dangers. When you imagine an event, defensive systems in the brain often react as if that event were occurring, preparing you to react physically, and giving rise to changes in other parts of the brain and body that your conscious brain experiences in a very emotional manner. Understanding how different parts of the brain and body are connected can help you understand what is happening when you are being tormented by worries and obsessive thoughts, or driven to engage in repetitive compulsive behaviors. More importantly, this understanding can also show you how to get out of the vicious cycle that OCD can create. Pathways in the brain that create OCD. Obsessive thinking and worries are produced in the cortex of the brain, the large, convoluted, gray structure that fills the topmost part of your skull. One of the main roles of the cortex is to process sensory information from our sense organs, like our ears and eyes, so that we understand what we hear and recognize the meaning of what we see. The cortex is instrumental in helping us decide whether what we see, hear, smell, and so on is something that should concern us. And the cortex doesn't just help us recognize what is going on around us. It also helps us observe our own behavior and detect whether we have made a mistake. The cortex is also where bodily functions are felt and movements are initiated. These processes in the cortex are essential for responding to signs of danger in our lives. But if danger is detected by the cortex, it's not only the cortex that responds. Other parts of the brain also become involved in mobilizing a response to the danger. A separate part of your brain, the amygdala, initiates the body's most effective response to danger. Surprisingly, the amygdala can sometimes recognize dangers before the cortex. This means that, in some cases, the amygdala is capable of making your body react to protect you before you even know what you're seeing or hearing. You may even remember some examples of this occurring in your life. One common example is driving on the highway and reacting to a danger so quickly that you have taken an action, turned the wheel rapidly, or hit the brake, before you even had time to realize what you were reacting to. The reason you can react before you even know what is happening is because there are two different pathways in the brain that process information about potential threats, and they operate on different speeds.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?